sometimes our two-tier justice system, which mostly benefits people with money, doesn't actually come through for the wealthy. It's rare, but it does happen sometimes. So one businessman found out the hard way when he paid Matt Schlapp. That's the guy who's the head of is it CPAC?
CPAC.
Yes, CPAC. That's the guy who's the head of CPAC. He's a uber conservative guy, not a good guy. But this businessman paid Schlapp $750,000 because he believed that since Schlapp has a close relationship with Donald Trump, Schlapp can effectively and successfully lobby Donald Trump to pardon the businessman. Now, why would he need to pardon the businessman? Well, it appears that he engaged in securities fraud, which is, when you really read into the details of this story, it's actually fascinating. So the guy that I'm talking about is Parker Pete Pettit. He paid Schlapp $750,000 for 2 weeks of lobbying work and failed to procure the very pardon for which he was being paid. Pettit is an Atlanta-based entrepreneur who was convicted of securities fraud in 2019 and faces up to 20 years in prison. Now, interestingly enough, before he was convicted, there were whistleblowers who spoke to some independent journalists about what was going on with the securities fraud. And what Pettit tried to do was sue the bloggers or the journalists for their blogs in order to reveal the identities of the whistleblowers. He's that kind of guy where he engages in criminality, and if a whistleblower reveals the criminality, he will do whatever it takes using his money and his power to find who the whistleblowers are. And I mean, I'm sure you can guess, like, he'd probably go after them pretty aggressively. But Kenneth Vogel also tweeted that last week, I revealed that Matt Schlapp was hired to lobby Trump for a pardon for Trump donor Pete Pettit. Schlapp disclosed yesterday he was paid $750,000 for that work between December 17th and December 31st. Pettit didn't get pardoned, and he provided the receipts for that. So I love it. I mean, there's really nothing more to say to this other than it's so good when this kind of stuff happens. Adrienne, since you're a lawyer, a trained lawyer, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I find this to be very interesting. I understand the whole pardon process and the fact that you do to some extent want to lobby the president in terms of advocating, but kind of, this whole even setup or implication of suggestions of quid pro quo is very problematic. But if anybody was going to do that in exchange for a pardon, it would be Donald Trump without question. The thing is, Donald Trump would be running up against another impeachable offense, as Article 2 of the Constitution says that you can't engage in bribery and escape impeachment. And by virtue of the fact that you'd kind of set up this quid pro quo structuring to try to get a pardon, is something that it would not work to do without almost potentially invalidating the pardon, arguably. But the problem is, of course, there's no precedent for any of this stuff, and it's all open air. But I can tell you, it has the whiff of prosecutors going after it. And so it's wild, the things coming out of this administration, and the fact that, hey, people were incentivized to do all sorts of things because we had a criminal leading our country.
Yeah, so I think stories like this sort of spectacularly reveal how corrupt the conflation is between our so-called democratic political system and the fact that it's largely bought out by private interests, private corporations, and oligarchs. And that is an issue that is, as we talked about for years, I love the Young Turks for this. That is an issue that is rife within both parties, a duopoly system, right? But when we see such a brazenly corrupt president like Trump, showing that he really has no moral compass whatsoever, these sorts of examples come out in the open. But there are a couple other things that I think are interesting here, just really briefly. One is that this gentleman describes himself as an entrepreneur, which is actually, I think, interesting because entrepreneur has become like the golden goose term these days. I don't know many entrepreneurs who are actual entrepreneurs that can throw out $750,000 for a potential pardon that doesn't go through. But I think it also kind of rests upon this point that we touched on earlier, Anna and Adrienne, which is that the solution to these problems is not moderation. It's not what Joe Manchin says. And actually, American people want policies that are pro-worker and pro-people, especially during this pandemic more than ever. And so there could be all sorts of fancy branding. Oh, I'm a moderate, this country is centrist reality. In reality, that is not true. So we have to think about the language and the ways of uniting people around policies that actually benefit them so we can do away with this kind of hideous corruption. And that is really what we're all about, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I hope no one misunderstands like my, I love the story because it backfired on someone who certainly doesn't deserve a pardon just because he's wealthy and can pay someone off to get a pardon. And so it's so rare to see actual justice play out like in any way, like to know that he wasn't able to be effective and just like paying someone off like feels really good. But you guys are both right, of course, in that this is not how the system should be, right? Like the whole point of presidential pardons is to, give people who have proven themselves to, be good people, somehow miraculously in this insane prison system, they were able to find rehabilitation and they're changed and they want to make their case. It's for people who maybe didn't start off on a level playing field and in a young age made some pretty poor decisions, but it shouldn't define the rest of their lives. Like those are the kinds of stories I personally think about when it comes to presidential pardons. Miss Alice, who Kim Kardashian made a case for, Alice Johnson, and she was pardoned by Donald Trump. That's a perfect example of someone who absolutely should receive some leniency after serving an insane amount of time in prison for a first-time criminal offense. And so, but when you hear stories about this so-called entrepreneur who engaged in securities fraud, thinking that like, all I need to do is pay money to someone who's close to Trump and he'll make his case and Trump will pardon me. Like it's gross. This is not someone who's reformed. This is not someone who's learned his lesson. This is someone who's used to using his wealth and his power to get himself out of sticky situations. And for once, it's not gonna work and it feels really good to see it. So I'm here for that. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope he can't deduct that payment on his taxes. Do not consider it a business expense. It's not okay, no.
Yeah, totally agree. And also like, imagine being convicted of a serious crime that you're facing 20 years in prison for. But you're still like, you still have the funds, like nearly $1 million, like to hand over to a lobbyist, hoping that they can get you off as easily as possible. So remember, Donald Trump doesn't do anything unless he sees a direct benefit for himself. And so if this money were illegally paid to Donald Trump directly, he'd pardon the guy. And who knows if he'd get caught or not. That would definitely be illegal. But remember, paying a lobbyist like Schlapp to do what he did, that is legal. He is able to do that, and that's a huge problem.
And I just want to say really quickly that also pardons should be for people who support human rights and journalism. People like Edward Snowden. I believe Julian Assange should be pardoned. With other whistleblowers, people who support civil rights and human rights and an actual democracy.
Yes, yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And look, I wasn't really shocked when Trump did not pardon Snowden and Julian Assange. Remember, it's the DOJ under the Trump administration that was aggressively trying to extradite Julian Assange so he could face criminal charges here in the United States. So I don't know why anyone thought that Donald Trump would do the right thing in pardoning Assange. Of course, he's not gonna do that. And my theory was proven correct, unfortunately.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.